The dust settled across the canyon as Chief Nakano looked at the broken remains of the human settlement. His warriors moved through the debris with practiced skill, gathering what few supplies remained after the raid. The settlers had put up little resistance, their weapons no match for Apache tactics. Among the captives stood a woman with dirt on her face and hands tied with rough cord. Her dress was torn and her dark hair messy, but her eyes held something Nakano had not expected to see. Unlike the others who cried or stared ahead with blank faces, she watched everything with sharp attention. Nakano's second warrior, Karuk, came to him with a tired look on his face. The pale-skinned people had little worth taking. Their weapons were basic and their horses were weak. Nakano nodded as his eyes fell on his own warhorse, Lightning Hoof, who stood nearby with a bad limp. The animal had taken an injury during the raid when it stepped into a hidden ravine. The horse's breathing was heavy and Nakano knew the truth. Lightning Hoof would never carry a warrior into battle again. A traveling merchant from the Comanche territories had arrived just before the raid, with his wagon filled with goods. He now stood at a safe distance, clearly hoping to leave with his life and perhaps some profit. The merchant's eyes moved from the injured horse to the captive woman. He told Chief Nakano that he could use a servant for his journey south, and that woman there looked strong enough. He would trade a healthy warhorse for her, a black coat horse that was 4 years old and trained for battle. Nakano studied the woman again. She was perhaps 30 winters old, a widow based on the simple ring she wore and the black cloth band on her sleeve. She had strong shoulders, hands with marks from hard work, and intelligent eyes. But what use was a human servant to an Apache chief? The woman spoke then with a clear voice despite being a captive. She said she was worth more than any horse. Kuruk laughed sharply and told her that she was worth what they said she was worth and nothing more. But Nakano held up his hand for silence. There was something in her tone, not begging or asking for mercy, but stating a simple fact. Nakano asked her name. She replied that her name was Claire Bennett, and she was a teacher before the warriors killed her husband and destroyed their settlement. She could read, write, work with numbers, and speak 3 languages. The merchant made a dismissive sound and said those were fine skills for a servant, but he would teach her to cook and clean instead. Nakano thought about this carefully. His people had been at war with the human settlers for 2 full seasons now, ever since the first colony ships had landed in what the humans called New Arizona Territory. The Apache had claimed these red canyons and rocky hills for 20 generations, since their own ancestors had fled a dying homeworld and found this place among the stars. The humans claimed they had purchased the rights to settle here from the Galactic Council. The Apache had never recognized the Council's authority over their ancestral lands. Nakano made his decision and said he would make this trade, but the woman would stay with them and not with the merchant. They would take the horse. The merchant's face showed surprise and then a look of calculation. The horse was worth much, and he asked what Nakano would give in addition to the woman. Nakano replied with a cold voice that he would give the merchant his life and free passage through their territory, and that was the trade. The merchant swallowed hard and nodded quickly, saying it was a fair trade. Within the hour, the exchange was complete. Lightning Hoof was given to the merchant with supplies for his recovery, and a powerful black horse now stood among the Apache horses. Claire Bennett's hands were freed from the cord, though she was now marked as property of Chief Nakano's household. As the war party prepared to return to their canyon stronghold, Claire walked among them without bonds but watched carefully by warriors on all sides. Nakano rode nearby, studying this strange human woman who had claimed to be worth more than a horse. He had made many trades in his lifetime as chief, and he wondered if this would prove to be his wisest choice or his most foolish one. The journey back to the stronghold took most of the day as they climbed higher into the red rock formations. Claire's legs hurt from the steep climb, but she refused to show any weakness. She had not survived 2 years on this harsh frontier world by being fragile. The sun was setting when they finally reached the hidden entrance to the Apache stronghold, carved into the side of a massive rocky hill and invisible from the canyon floor below. As they entered the main cave, Claire's eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light. She had expected a basic camp, but what she saw instead made her think differently about everything. The caves had been changed with technology that was subtle but clearly there. The temperature felt comfortable. Soft lights glowed from the walls and water flowed through carved channels that looked clean and pure. Nakano watched her reaction and noted that she seemed surprised. Claire admitted honestly that she expected less, as the colonial reports had described the Apache as savage wanderers. Kuruk spoke with bitterness in his voice, saying that their colonial reports were written by fools who saw only what they wished to see. The Apache were building great communities among the stars when human people still crawled in dirt on their homeworld. An older woman came out from one of the side chambers with silver hair braided with colored beads that showed high status. Her face had lines from age, but her movements were sure and strong. She looked at Nakano and asked why he brought a human into their home. Nakano bowed his head with respect and called her Grandmother Rain, then explained that this was Claire Bennett and he had taken her as household servant in trade for Lightning Hoof. Grandmother Rain's eyes became narrow as she studied Claire with sharp attention. She asked Nakano if he had traded his grandfather's warhorse for a human woman, and said the council would have words about this. Nakano replied calmly that the council could speak all they wished, but Lightning Hoof was injured beyond recovery as a war mount, and he made a practical decision. Claire watched this talk carefully and stored away information. Nakano held power here, but not complete power. There was a council, there were elders with influence, there was structure and order. Not so different from human settlements, really. Grandmother Rain came closer to Claire and walked around her slowly. She asked what skills Claire had and whether she could cook their food, fix their clothes, or care for their children. Claire said she could learn, but her skills were in other areas. She was a teacher who educated children in mathematics, sciences, books, and history. She could also take care of basic technology systems and provide medical care at a field level. Grandmother Rain said the word educated like it was something bad. She said the humans sent their educated ones to take Apache lands with papers and laws. Claire replied quietly that the humans sent everyone, the educated and the desperate, the brave and the foolish. Earth was dying and the people ran in every direction seeking new homes. She came here with her husband seeking peace and a new beginning, but instead she found war. Nakano pointed to a small side chamber and told Claire she would stay there. She would work in the communal kitchens preparing food, and she would help Grandmother Rain with whatever tasks were assigned. She would not leave the stronghold without someone watching her. She would not go near the weapons room, the council chambers, or the communications center. If she broke these rules, she would be tied up and locked away. He asked if she understood. Claire said she understood. Nakano told her to go and that Grandmother Rain would show her the duties. As Nakano turned to leave, Claire spoke again and asked if she could ask a question. He stopped and looked back, telling her to speak. She asked why he kept her here instead of letting the merchant take her and what value she had to him. Nakano was silent for a long moment. He said she claimed she was worth more than a horse, and he wished to see if she spoke truth or just desperation. She had 1 season to prove her worth. After that, he would decide whether she stayed or joined the next merchant group heading south. With those words, he left with Kuruk following close behind. Grandmother Rain's face softened slightly once they were alone. She told Claire to come and she would show her the kitchens and her sleeping chamber. She would also teach her the first rule of survival here, which was to never make promises she could not keep. Her grandson did not forgive lies. Claire nodded and picked up the small bundle of her remaining things. She had 1 season to prove her worth to an Apache chief who had won against a dozen human settlements. 1 season to find a way to survive and perhaps to find a path toward something more than just staying alive. She had faced harder situations before. The first week passed in exhausting work. Claire's hands, already rough from frontier life, got new painful spots as she worked in the communal kitchens. The Apache food was different from human standard meals, using local plants and meat that needed careful preparation. Grandmother Rain was a strict teacher who accepted nothing less than perfect work. She would break apart Claire's bread attempts and say the measurements must be exact, the working time must be precise, and to do it again. Claire held back her frustration and started over. But in the evenings after the work was done, Grandmother Rain's manner changed. She would sit by the fire in her chamber and speak of Apache history with a storyteller's voice. She said her people left their homeworld 500 years ago when the planet was dying, eaten up by wars over the last resources. The great clans scattered to the stars. Some joined the Galactic Council and accepted their rules and limits. Others, like her ancestors, sought independence. Claire listened while cleaning cooking pots and asked how they found this world. Grandmother Rain said they purchased the navigation rights legally, paid in salvage rights and mineral claims. They came here to these canyons and found them empty of thinking life. They built their homes, raised their children, and lived in peace for 10 generations. Then humans arrived, Claire said softly. Grandmother Rain corrected her. and said the Galactic Council sold the same territory to human colonial corporations. The Apache complained through legal channels and sent delegations. They filed claims and counterclaims. The Council thought about it for 20 years while human colony ships launched. By the time they ruled in Apache favor, 30,000 humans had already settled in their canyons. Claire put down the pot she was cleaning and said she did not know this. Grandmother Rain said of course she did not know, because the colonial corporations did not advertise their tricks. They told settlers this was empty land free for the taking. They gave maps with Apache settlements erased. They promised safety and wealth. And now there was war, Claire said. Grandmother Rain said now they defended what was theirs as any people would. Over the following weeks, Claire began to understand how complicated everything was. The Apache were not mindless raiders. They had legal claims, historical proof, and a smart understanding of galactic law. They raided human settlements with strategy, targeting colonial corporate buildings while often allowing civilian refugees to run away. Her own settlement had been destroyed because it sat on top of an ancient Apache burial site that the colonial maps had erased. She learned all this not just from Grandmother Rain, but from the other Apache she met in the stronghold. The warriors who came to the kitchens for meals, the children who played in the caverns, the craftspeople who kept the technology working. And she saw Chief Nakano. Though he rarely spoke to her directly, he would pass through the communal areas, talking with his warriors, speaking with the elders, settling disputes. Claire watched how he led and noticed the respect he got not through fear but through wisdom and control. One evening, as Claire carried water from the cleaning system, she met Nakano in one of the narrow passages. He stood before a wall covered in carved names with his hand resting on the stone. He said it was the memorial wall without turning around. Every Apache who had died in this war was recorded here. Claire came closer carefully. The names numbered in the hundreds. She said there were so many. Nakano said human people had lost more and that war was costly for everyone. Claire asked then why continue fighting and why not talk about a settlement. Nakano finally looked at her and said they tried talking for 20 years and had achieved nothing. The colonial corporations wanted Apache land and would use any legal trick to claim it. The Galactic Council was slow and corrupt, so they fought because it was the only language human people seemed to understand. Claire said quietly that not all of them were like that and some came seeking peace, not conquest. Nakano replied that then they were lied to, and now they paid the price for their corporation's greed. He left her there in the passage, staring at the wall of names. That night, as Claire lay on her sleeping mat, she thought about honor. The Apache fought to defend their ancestral lands against an invasion hidden by legal paperwork. The human settlers fought to protect homes they had built without knowing about the claims that came before them. Everyone believed they were in the right and everyone had lost people they loved. And somewhere in this mess of competing truths, Claire had to find her worth and her survival. On the morning of Claire's 30th day in the stronghold, Grandmother Rain woke her before dawn. She told Claire to dress quickly because the council had called for her. Claire's stomach felt tight. She had known this would come at some point. The Apache leadership would want to question the human living among them, and would want to judge the threat she might be. She dressed in the simple clothes she had been given, Apache-made garments that were more useful than her torn settler dress. She followed Grandmother Rain through the winding passages to a chamber she had never entered before. The council room was round and carved from the living rock of the hill. Soft blue lights cast a glow over the gathering. 12 elders sat in a half-circle with Chief Nakano seated at the center. Warriors stood along the walls with hands near their weapons. Claire was told to stand in the middle of the circle. An elder with a scarred face and gray hair spoke first. He said his name was Elder Tahoma, and they had permitted her to live among them for 1 moon cycle. In that time, she had worked in the kitchens and learned some of their ways. But the question remained about what value she truly brought to their people. Claire had been preparing for this moment. She said she brought knowledge and could teach their children human languages, which would help in talks between the groups. She could explain human technology and tactics. She could serve as a translator if they tried diplomatic channels again. Elder Tahoma said they had translators and they had captured human technology to study. So what else did she offer? Claire changed her approach and said she brought perspective. She understood how human colonial corporations worked because she had worked for one before coming here. She processed settlement claims and resource requests. She knew their paperwork system. their weaknesses, and their internal conflicts. This caused some quiet talking among the council. Kuruk stepped forward from his position along the wall and said she could be a spy, feeding them false information while learning their secrets. Nakano said that was a valid concern, and then asked Claire to tell them about her husband, noting that she wore a wedding ring though she claimed to be a widow. Claire touched the simple metal band on her finger. She said his name was Peter Bennett and he was a maintenance engineer. They met on Earth in the flooded remains of what used to be called Colorado. They married and applied for colonial placement together, hoping for a better life than Earth could offer. They were assigned to the new Arizona territory 18 months ago. Nakano asked how he died. Claire replied that he died in the raid on their settlement. He was in the power station when the warriors attacked. He died trying to shut down the reactor so it would not explode and kill everyone in the area, including the Apache warriors. Silence filled the chamber. Elder Tahoma asked if he saved Apache lives. Claire said he saved everyone's lives because he did not see differences. That was who Peter was. He believed people were people, no matter where they came from. Nakano leaned forward and said that yet she did not seem to hate them for his death. Claire said carefully that she hated the circumstances that led to his death. She hated the colonial corporations that lied to them about this land. She hated the Galactic Council that sold the same territory twice. She hated the greed and paperwork that turned this canyon into a war zone. But hating the Apache specifically, what would that accomplish? Kuruk said it would be natural and it would be human. Claire replied that it would be pointless because hate did not bring back the dead. It only created more dead people. Another elder, a woman with white hair and kind eyes, spoke up. She said her name was Elder Sani, and she had heard that Claire worked well in the kitchens, that she learned quickly and did not complain. But many could perform such tasks. Chief Nakano traded a warhorse for her, and that horse had family lines tracing back 15 generations. What could she offer that made such a trade worth it? This was the heart of it. Claire took a breath and made her gamble. She said she could offer them a path to victory that did not require endless war. They were right that the colonial corporations would not stop coming. More ships launched from Earth every month. They could not kill them all or raid every settlement. But they could make their legal case so strong, so public, that the Galactic Council had no choice but to enforce it. Elder Tahoma said harshly that they tried that for 20 years. Claire said they tried working within the system, but she was suggesting they break the system. She could help them document every lie, every fake claim, every deliberate erasure of their people from the colonial maps. She could help them build a case so damning that when they presented it to the galactic media, the council would face such public pressure, they would have to act. Kuruk said with doubt that the galactic media did not care about small border conflicts. Claire replied that they cared about dramatic stories. And what could be more dramatic than an ancient people fighting for their survival against a corrupt system and greedy corporations, especially if that people had evidence, documentation, and a human witness speaking on their behalf. The council chamber erupted in discussion. Some elders seemed interested, others doubtful, and still others openly hostile to the idea. Nakano raised his hand for silence and said this would require them to trust her with sensitive information, with their history, their legal claims, and their evidence. Claire said yes simply. Kuruk demanded why they should trust a human. Claire said because her husband died saving Apache warriors, because she had nowhere else to go, because she was tired of watching good people die for the mistakes of corporations and councils, and because if there was even a small chance that words could accomplish what weapons could not, was that not worth exploring? Nakano stood and the chamber fell silent. He said the council would think about it and Claire was dismissed. As Grandmother Rain led her from the chamber, Claire heard the heated discussion beginning behind her. She had played her hand and now she could only wait to see if she had gambled wisely. 3 days passed before Nakano called Claire to his private chamber. The space was plain but functional, with storage units containing weapons, maps, and data tablets. A small altar in the corner held burning herbs that filled the room with a sharp, clean smell. Nakano said without extra words that the council was divided. Half believed she could be useful, and half believed she was a threat. He had decided to conduct a test. Claire nodded, having expected this, and asked what kind of test. Nakano turned on a holographic display above one of his tablets. An image appeared of a human colonial settlement, much larger than the one Claire had lived in. He said this was Settlement 7, the regional administrative center. It housed about 2,000 humans and served as the headquarters for the Colonial Development Corporation in this sector. Claire said she knew it because they received their placement orders from that office. Nakano continued and said they had captured communications suggesting the CDC was planning a major attack against their stronghold. 3 companies of paid soldiers, heavy weapons, and air support. They had discovered the stronghold location through satellite watching. Claire studied the hologram carefully and asked when. Nakano said within 2 weeks according to their intelligence, perhaps sooner. He asked what she wanted to do. Nakano changed the display to show complex paperwork documents. He said she claimed to understand how colonial corporations worked. He wanted her to review these captured files and tell him 3 things. First, who authorized this attack? Second, where were they vulnerable? Third, how could they stop the attack without significant bloodshed? Claire moved closer to the display with her eyes scanning the documents. They were dense with corporate legal language, budget listings, and authorization codes. The kind of paperwork she had processed hundreds of times in her old job. She said she would need time and access to the full intelligence archive on the CDC. Nakano said Kuruk would provide access to a secured terminal in the archive chamber. She would work there under guard, and she had 3 days. Claire spent those 3 days barely sleeping. The archive chamber became her world, filled with captured transmissions, copied documents, and watching data the Apache had gathered over months of careful intelligence work. She worked methodically, checking names against each other, tracking budget flows, and identifying patterns. Kuruk watched her constantly with his hand never far from his weapon. On the 2nd day, he finally spoke beyond simple instructions. He asked why she was doing this, helping the people who held her captive against her own kind. Claire looked up from the terminal with tired eyes. She said the people planning this attack were not her kind. They were corporate officers sitting in comfortable offices, sending other people to die for profit numbers. The soldiers they hired and the settlers they lured here with false promises, those were her people. And they were dying because of lies. Kuruk said those were pretty words, but said them with doubt. Claire replied they were true words. She said Kuruk lost his wife in a raid 2 years ago, and she read her name on the memorial wall. She asked if the corporate officers who sent those settlers to build on Apache sacred sites lost anything, or did they collect their bonuses while his wife died defending her home? Kuruk's face darkened and he asked how she knew about his wife. Claire said grandmother Rain told her. She also told Claire that his wife was a healer, who tried to make peace before the fighting started. She believed in honor, in finding better ways than endless war. Kuruk said bitterly that honor did not save her. Claire agreed but said maybe it could prevent others from meeting the same fate, and that was what she was trying to do here. On the morning of the 3rd day, Claire requested a meeting with the full council. Nakano granted it, and once again she stood in the round chamber before the gathered elders. She announced that she had reviewed the documents. The attack was authorized by Director Paul Hammond of the Colonial Development Corporation. He was under pressure from the Galactic Board to show results in this sector. Settlement numbers were down because of the conflict, and the CDC stock price was falling. He needed a military victory to justify increased security spending and to reassure potential colonists. Elder Tahoma said impatiently to tell them what they did not already know. Claire stated that Hammond was stealing corporate funds. She found evidence in the budget listings. He was inflating the cost of the paid soldier contracts and keeping the difference. If this information reached the CDC board or the Galactic Finance Authority, he would be arrested and the attack would collapse due to lack of authorized leadership. The chamber erupted in interested talk. Nakano asked if she could prove this. Claire turned on a portable display, showing a series of money transfers highlighted in red. She said these payments did not match the standard paid soldier contract rates. The excess funds were being sent through shell companies registered in the outer colonies. She checked the company registration data against Hammond's personal financial reports that were required under galactic law. 3 of the shell companies were registered to his family members. Elder Sani leaned forward studying the data and said this was detailed work. Claire said this was exactly the kind of fraud she was trained to detect in her old position. Colonial corporations were corrupt and they lied to settlers, cheated governments, and stole from their own shareholders. Hammond was typical, not unusual. Nakano asked how they could use this information. Claire advised sending it to 3 places at the same time. First, to the CDC board through encrypted channels. Second, to the Galactic Finance Authority. Third, and most importantly, to the galactic news services. Make it a scandal too big to ignore. Hammond would be removed within days and the attack would be cancelled while the CDC dealt with the internal crisis. Kuruk challenged her and asked what if they simply appointed a new director who continued the attack. Claire said, then they would release the second wave of information she had prepared. Evidence that the CDC's original land claims in this sector were fake. This would go to the Galactic Council along with a formal request for immediate judgment. With the CDC already drowning in scandal, the Council would not want to be seen supporting illegal settlements. They would freeze all military action while investigating. The Council talked among themselves for an hour, while Claire waited outside the chamber. When she was called back in, Nakano stood at the center of the circle. He said they would implement her plan, but she must understand that if she had deceived them, if this was somehow a trap, she would not live to see the consequences. Claire said calmly that she understood, and she was not deceiving them. Nakano said then she had passed the first test and her value was proven, but trust must still be earned. As Claire left the chamber, she felt the weight of what she had just done. She had turned against the Colonial Development Corporation and had given the Apache the tools to strike a devastating blow against human expansion in this sector. But she had also perhaps saved lives on both sides, and that, she told herself, was what honor demanded. The plan worked better than anyone had expected. Within 4 days of the Apache sending the evidence through carefully hidden galactic channels, Director Paul Hammond was arrested by Galactic Finance Authority agents. The scandal exploded across the news networks, revealing not just Hammond's stealing but a wider pattern of corruption within the Colonial Development Corporation. The paid soldier attack was cancelled, and Settlement 7 descended into administrative chaos as the CDC board scrambled to contain the damage. But victory came with unexpected complications. Claire was in the kitchens helping prepare the evening meal when the alarm sounded. Warriors rushed to defensive positions as Grandmother Rain hurried the non-fighters deeper into the stronghold. Claire asked what was happening. Grandmother Rain said tersely that human ships were approaching, multiple vessels in military formation. Claire's heart sank. Had her plan backfired? Had she somehow led the CDC to launch an even larger attack? She was escorted to the council chamber, where Nakano and his advisors watched the situation through the stronghold's sensor network. The holographic display showed 3 ships descending toward the canyon. But these were not CDC vessels. Claire said those were Galactic Council peacekeeping ships and they were not supposed to operate in colonial territories without authorization. Kuruk demanded to know why they were here. The communication system made a sound. Nakano turned it on and a human face appeared on the screen, a woman in the formal uniform of a Galactic Council mediator. She said her name was Mediator Helen Grant of the Galactic Council Peacekeeping Division. She was seeking communication with the leadership of the Apache Nation of New Arizona Territory. They came under flag of truce to discuss immediate judgment of territorial claims. Nakano glanced at Claire, who nodded slightly. This was a standard opening for formal mediation. Nakano identified himself as Chief Nakano and asked her to state her purpose. Mediator Grant said the Galactic Council had reviewed the evidence submitted regarding Colonial Development Corporation fraud and illegal settlement claims. They were prepared to offer immediate binding judgment to resolve the territorial dispute.
She asked if they would accept the mediation.
The council chamber fell silent. This was what they had fought for, what Claire had promised might be possible. But it was also a risk because binding judgment could go either way. Elder Tahoma spoke up and asked why they should trust the council now when they ignored Apache claims for 20 years. Mediator Grant's expression remained professional. She said because the scandal had created political pressure the council could not ignore. The media coverage had been extensive, and multiple member worlds were demanding accountability. If the council was seen as helping illegal settlements, it undermined their authority across all territories. They must act now and act decisively. Claire whispered to Nakano that they were afraid. The scandal had made them vulnerable, and they needed a victory to restore their reputation. Nakano considered this and asked what the terms of judgment were. Mediator Grant said there would be immediate ceasefire on both sides. An independent commission would review all territorial claims and evidence. Both parties would present their case. The commission's ruling would be final and enforced by council peacekeeping forces. The process would take about 60 days. Nakano asked what would happen if they refused. Mediator Grant said then the situation would continue as it was, but she would be honest. Public sentiment was currently in Apache favor due to the CDC fraud revelations. That might not last because political winds shifted quickly. This might be their best opportunity for a peaceful resolution. The council met in emergency session. Claire was asked to stay and provide her thoughts. She said Mediator Grant was right about the political winds. Right now, the galactic media showed the Apache as victims of corporate fraud. But if fighting continued and human casualties mounted, that story would shift. The council was offering this because they were embarrassed and needed to appear effective. But they were also genuinely empowered to enforce a ruling right now, which they were not before the scandal. Elder Sani asked if they could trust the judgment to be fair. Claire explained that the commission would be made up of representatives from non-aligned worlds. Under normal circumstances, it might favor human interests because of political pressure. But right now, with the scandal fresh and the media watching, the commission would be under intense watching to appear impartial. Their chances of a favorable ruling were higher now than they had ever been. The debate continued for hours. Some elders wanted to press their military advantage while the CDC was in confusion. Others saw the judgment as the diplomatic victory they had sought for decades. Nakano listened to all perspectives before making his decision. He announced they would accept judgment, but they would not disarm. The ceasefire would be observed, but their warriors would remain ready. And Claire Bennett would serve as their human advisor during the process. This last statement caused surprised reactions from several council members. Kurik asked if Nakano trusted her that much. Nakano replied that she had proven her value and her honesty. She understood both worlds and both systems. They needed that understanding if they were to navigate the judgment successfully. The decision was communicated to Mediator Grant, and within a day the ceasefire was in effect. Galactic Council observers positioned themselves between Apache territory and human settlements. The Judgment Commission was assembled on neutral ground, a council station in orbit above the planet. Claire found herself thrust into a role she had never imagined, as advisor to an Apache chief in his people's most important diplomatic battle in generations. Grandmother Rain found her that evening, sitting alone in one of the observation chambers and staring out at the star-filled sky. The elder woman said Claire was troubled. Claire said she was responsible now. If the judgment failed, if she had guided them poorly, people would die, both human and Apache. Grandmother Rain said Claire had already saved lives. The attack was canceled and the ceasefire was holding. Whatever came next, she had given both peoples something they had lost, which was hope that there might be a better way. Claire said hope was not enough. Grandmother Rain agreed but said it was a beginning. And sometimes a beginning was all anyone could offer. Claire thought about Peter and the choice he had made to save everyone in that power station, regardless of which side they were on. She thought about honor and the lesson she was learning from these people she had once been told were savages. Honor was not about whose side you were on. It was about what you were willing to sacrifice for what was right. Claire said she would do her best for everyone. Grandmother Rain said she knew Claire would, and that was why her grandson trusted her, and why she did as well. The judgment hearings took place in a vast chamber aboard the council station, with holographic feeds broadcasting the proceedings to billions across the galaxy. Claire sat behind Chief Nakano as part of his advisory team, surrounded by Apache elders and legal experts they had hired with emergency funds from allies among other displaced peoples. The commission consisted of 5 mediators from neutral worlds. There was a Cetian philosopher known for logical thinking, a vegan ethicist, a Rigelian historian, a human from old Earth's academic sectors, and a Denebian lawyer. They sat in high positions while the two parties faced each other across the chamber floor. Representing the Colonial Development Corporation and human settlers was a team of expensive lawyers led by attorney Marcus Flynn, a man whose reputation for winning cases through technical tricks was well known. The first week was devoted to establishing the basic facts. The Apache presented their original purchase agreements for the territory, dating back nearly 300 years. The documents were checked and verified as real. Attorney Flynn did not dispute their realness. Instead, he argued that the Apache had abandoned the territory for extended periods, that their population was too small to effectively use such vast lands, and that human settlement represented productive development that benefited the galactic community. Claire listened carefully, taking notes and passing observations to Nakano. Flynn was building a case based on practical principles, the greatest good for the greatest number. 2,000 human settlers versus a few hundred Apache meant human interests should win. When it was Nakano's turn to speak, Claire had helped him prepare a different approach. Nakano said the question before this commission was not about numbers but about law and honor. The Apache purchased this territory legally. They maintained it according to their customs, which did not require dense city development. The Galactic Council accepted their care for 3 centuries without complaint. He turned on a holographic display showing the memorial wall from the stronghold, with the hundreds of names carved in stone. He said these were their dead, Apache who died defending land they legally owned against an invasion that began when the Council sold the same territory a second time. Not because they had done anything wrong or violated any law, but because colonial corporations wanted profit and the Council wanted settlement fees. The Cetian mediator leaned forward and asked if Nakano could prove the Council sold the territory twice. Claire stood having prepared for this exact moment. She said she could, and that she had compiled a complete timeline of all transactions involving New Arizona territory. She presented the evidence methodically, showing the Apache purchase agreement from 287 years ago, the Council's recognition of Apache control renewed every 50 years as required by galactic law, and then, importantly, the CDC's purchase of settlement rights just 30 years ago, with no mention of existing Apache claims in the documentation. Claire explained that the CDC was required to conduct careful checking regarding existing claims. The purchase agreement clearly stated that settlement rights were only valid for unoccupied territories, or territories where existing owners consented to shared development. The Apache never consented and the CDC never asked. The Council never informed them of the existing Apache claim. Attorney Flynn objected and said the Council maintains public records. The Apache claim was on file, and if the CDC failed to check, that was a private matter between the CDC and the Council, not grounds for canceling human settlement rights. Claire countered that she had evidence the Council deliberately concealed the Apache claim from the CDC purchase documentation. This was not an oversight but fraud. She presented communications between Council officials discussing how to handle the Apache problem by simply not mentioning it in the settlement authorization, betting that the Apache population was too small to effectively resist colonization. The chamber erupted in noise. Even Attorney Flynn seemed shaken by this revelation. The vegan ethicist spoke with disapproval in her voice and said if this evidence was real, it suggested the Council itself engaged in fraudulent practices. The Rigelian historian confirmed after reviewing the data that the evidence was real. These were genuine Council communications, verified by security methods that could not be faked. Over the following weeks, the case unfolded like a slow revelation of institutional corruption. Claire guided the Apache legal team through complex arguments, helped them present evidence effectively, and identified weaknesses in the CDC's position. But she also did something else. She insisted that the Apache acknowledge legitimate human concerns. She told the commission during one session that many of the settlers came here in good faith. They were lied to, just as the Apache were lied to. They built homes, started farms, and raised children. They were victims in this as well. This admission surprised Attorney Flynn and seemed to genuinely move the human mediator on the commission. Nakano followed her lead and said they did not seek to punish innocent settlers for the crimes of corporations and bureaucrats. They sought justice, which meant recognition of their legitimate claim, payment for their losses, and a framework for shared use of the territory that respected both peoples. Attorney Flynn seized on this and asked about shared use, asking if they would allow human settlements to remain. Nakano clarified that they would in areas that did not violate their sacred sites, that did not monopolize essential resources, and that operated under Apache control with humans as welcomed guests rather than invaders. They proposed a model similar to historical arrangements on Earth, with human settlements functioning as semi-independent communities within Apache territory, with clear agreements about governance, resource use, and cultural respect. This proposal shifted the entire feeling of the judgment. Suddenly it was not about all or nothing, but about finding a practical compromise. The commission stopped to think about everything. During the break, Claire found herself alone with Nakano in one of the station's observation lounges. She said he risked much by offering to let humans remain, and some of his people would see it as weakness. Nakano said some of his people saw the continuation of war as the only path to honor, but Claire had taught him something and shown him that honor could take many forms. Her husband chose to save everyone, not just his own kind. She chose to seek peace rather than revenge. These were lessons in honor that he would carry with him always. Claire said she learned it from watching him, from seeing how he led and how he balanced strength with wisdom, how he listened to all voices on his council, even those he disagreed with. He could have simply killed all the human captives from her settlement. Instead, he made a trade for a servant widow, seeking something of value beyond immediate revenge. Nakano smiled slightly and said he still wondered if he received fair value for Lightning Hoof. Claire said a warhorse had value in battle, but a person who helped end the war might be worth more. 3 days later, the commission announced its ruling. The commission chamber was packed with observers and media representatives as the 5 mediators prepared to deliver their verdict. Claire sat beside Nakano with her heart pounding despite her outward calm. The Cetian mediator spoke first with his voice carrying through the chamber's sound system. He said the commission had reviewed extensive evidence regarding territorial claims to the new Arizona territory. They had found clear documentation of fraudulent practices by both the Galactic Council and the Colonial Development Corporation. Quiet talking rippled through the gathered crowd. The mediator continued and said the Apache Nation held legitimate and legal claim to the new Arizona territory, purchased in good faith and maintained according to galactic law. The subsequent sale of settlement rights to the Colonial Development Corporation was conducted without proper checking and with deliberate concealment of existing claims. This was fraud under galactic commercial law. Attorney Flynn's face went pale. The vegan ethicist continued and said, however, they also recognized that many human settlers came to this territory in good faith, having been deceived by the very institutions that should have protected them. They had invested their resources, their labor, and their lives in building communities on this world. Simple justice demanded they not be made to suffer for the crimes of others. The Rigelian historian turned on a holographic display showing a proposed map. The commission ruled as follows. First, the Apache Nation was recognized as the sovereign authority over the new Arizona territory. Second, existing human settlements could remain under a framework of independent governance within Apache control. Third, the Colonial Development Corporation would pay substantial payments to both the Apache Nation and affected human settlers for damages caused by fraudulent settlement practices. The human mediator from Old Earth spoke next. Fourth, the Galactic Council would establish a truth and reconciliation process to document all injustices committed during this conflict and to create protections preventing similar situations in the future. Fifth, a joint Apache Human Development Council would be created to oversee future growth in the territory, ensuring mutual benefit and cultural respect. The Danebian lawyer concluded by saying this ruling was final and binding. Enforcement would be maintained by Galactic Council peacekeeping forces for a period of 5 years, while the new governance structures were established. Both parties had 30 days to indicate acceptance or rejection of these terms. Nakano stood with dignified bearing and said the Apache Nation accepted these terms. After a moment of frantic consultation with CDC representatives through holographic link, Attorney Flynn stood as well and said the Colonial Development Corporation and human settler representatives accepted these terms. The chamber erupted in reactions ranging from celebration to outrage, but the ruling stood firm. In the days that followed, Claire helped negotiate the detailed implementation of the Commission's ruling. She worked alongside both Apache elders and human settler representatives, translating not just languages but cultures and concerns. The payments from the CDC were substantial, enough to rebuild Apache buildings damaged in the war, enough to compensate human settlers for losses they had suffered, and enough to fund the Joint Development Council for decades. But money was only part of the resolution. The harder work was building trust. Claire found herself serving as a bridge between the two communities. She helped organize meetings between Apache leaders and human settler councils. She made discussions easier about water rights, agricultural zones, and sacred site protections. She worked with Grandmother Rain to establish cultural exchange programs so human children could learn Apache history and Apache children could understand human perspectives. One evening, 6 months after the judgment ruling, Nakano called Claire to his chamber once more. He said he had been reviewing the accounting of her service. When he traded Lightning Hoof for her, he gave her 1 season to prove her worth. That season had long passed. Claire nodded, uncertain where this was leading. Nakano continued and said she had proven her worth many times over. She helped prevent a destructive attack. She guided them through successful judgment. She had become essential to the peace process. The question now was what she wished for herself. Claire said she did not understand. Nakano explained that she was no longer a captive or a servant. She was a free person under the Commission's ruling. She could return to the human settlements, seek passage to another world or whatever she chose. He asked what she wanted. Claire had thought about this question many times over the past months. She said she wanted to continue the work they had started. The bridge between their peoples was fragile. It needed tending, nurturing, and constant effort. She could help with that work if he would allow her. Nakano asked in what capacity. Claire said as whatever he needed as advisor, translator, or mediator. She did not need a title and just needed purpose. Nakano studied her for a long moment. He said Grandmother Rain had suggested she might serve as the Apache Nation's official liaison to the human settlements. It would be a formal position with responsibilities and authority. She would speak for the Apache in human councils and help the Apache understand human concerns. He asked if this would suit her. Claire said it would, feeling something settle in her chest. Not quite peace, but purpose and direction. Nakano said then it was decided. He reached into a storage container and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He said before she accepted this position, he wished to give her something. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a beautifully crafted necklace with beads of turquoise and silver, arranged in a complex pattern. Nakano said this belonged to his mother and she wore it when she served as peacemaker between feuding clans. It was given to those who worked for unity rather than division. He thought she would approve of Claire wearing it. Claire felt tears come to her eyes as Nakano placed the necklace around her neck. She said she was honored more than she could express. Nakano replied that she had earned honor. When he first saw her among the captives, he thought she was simply a survivor, trying to say anything to stay alive. But she spoke truth when she said she was worth more than a horse. She was worth far more, and she taught him something important. Claire asked what that was. Nakano said honor was not about which people you belonged to, but about what you did when faced with difficult choices. Her husband chose to save everyone, not just his own kind. She chose to seek peace rather than revenge. These were lessons in honor that he would carry with him always. Claire said she learned from watching him. He could have chosen endless war, but he chose to try for peace. He could have rejected the judgment, but he trusted in law and justice even when he had been betrayed by those systems before. That took more courage than any battle. Nakano smiled and said perhaps they taught each other, which seemed fitting. Over the following years, Claire worked tirelessly to strengthen the fragile peace. There were setbacks and challenges, conflicts over resources, and misunderstandings between cultures. But slowly and steadily, the two communities learned to coexist. Human children played with Apache children in the canyons. Human farmers learned Apache water conservation techniques. Apache artisans sold their crafts in human markets. Mixed councils met regularly to address concerns before they became crises. And through it all, Claire wore her necklace and remembered the lesson she had learned from an Apache chief who had traded his warhorse for a servant widow. Honor was not inherited or demanded. It was earned through choices, through sacrifice, and through the willingness to seek better ways even when the easier path called out. The Joint Development Council met once a month in a neutral building built halfway between the Apache stronghold and Settlement 7. Claire chaired these meetings, carefully balancing the needs and concerns of both communities. Today's agenda included water allocation for the dry season, a dispute over mining rights near an Apache historical site, and a proposal for a shared school system. Elder Tahoma represented the Apache interests with his usual stern demeanor, but Claire had learned to read the subtle signs of approval or concern in his expressions. On the human side, a settler named Daniel Cooper spoke for the agricultural communities, while a woman named Lucy Grant represented the town councils. The water allocation discussion became heated as both sides presented their needs. The human farmers argued that their crops were essential for feeding both communities. Elder Tahoma countered that the proposed allocation would dry up springs that the Apache had used for centuries. Claire listened carefully to both arguments, then proposed a compromise. What if they implemented the Apache water conservation techniques across all human farms, which would reduce overall consumption by about 30%. That saved water could ensure the springs remained flowing while still meeting agricultural needs. Daniel Cooper looked skeptical, and asked if those techniques really worked on human crops. Claire smiled and said they could run a pilot program on several farms first. If it worked, they would expand it. If not, they would revisit the allocation. The council agreed to try this approach. The mining dispute was more complex. A human corporation wanted to extract rare minerals from a site that the Apache considered historically significant. Lucy Grant argued that the economic benefits would help both communities, providing jobs and income. Elder Tahoma was firm that some things were more valuable than money, and the site contained the remains of Apache ancestors who had died defending this territory in an ancient conflict. Claire asked if there were alternative sites with similar mineral deposits. After reviewing geological surveys, they identified 2 other locations that could work. The corporation agreed to shift their operations in exchange for Apache assistance with navigating the complex terrain. The shared school system proposal generated the most passionate discussion. Some Apache elders worried about their children losing cultural identity. Some human parents feared their children would fall behind in standard galactic curriculum. Claire had anticipated these concerns and had worked with Grandmother Rain to develop a detailed proposal. The school would teach both Apache and human history, both languages, and would blend traditional Apache knowledge with standard academic subjects. Children would learn mathematics and science alongside tracking skills and environmental stewardship. They would study galactic law and Apache customary law. After 3 hours of discussion and modifications, the council voted to establish a pilot school with voluntary enrollment. If it succeeded, they would expand the program. As the meeting concluded, Daniel Cooper approached Claire privately. He said his son had been asking questions about the war, about why humans and Apache had fought. He did not know how to explain it in a way that made sense. Claire thought for a moment and then said to tell his son the truth. That good people on both sides were lied to by bad people who cared more about profit than lives. That war happened because of those lies. But peace was possible because enough people chose to work for something better. Daniel nodded slowly and said that was a good answer, better than anything he had come up with. He thanked her and left. That evening, Claire sat with Grandmother Rain in the elders' chamber, sharing tea made from local herbs. The old woman had become not just a mentor but a true friend over the years. Grandmother Rain said she had been thinking about Claire's husband and the choice he made in the power station. She asked if Claire thought Peter knew his action would eventually lead to all this, to peace between their peoples. Claire said she did not think Peter was thinking that far ahead. He was just trying to prevent an explosion that would kill everyone nearby. But maybe that was what honor really meant, making the right choice in the moment without calculating all the consequences. Grandmother Rain said that was wisdom, and asked if Claire ever regretted staying here instead of returning to human settlements. Claire touched the necklace she wore and said never. This was where she belonged, building bridges and helping both peoples learn to see each other as neighbors rather than enemies. Grandmother Rain smiled and said Nakano made a wise trade that day. Claire laughed and said she hoped Lightning Hoof was happy wherever he ended up. Years continued to pass and the peace held. There were still disagreements and tensions, but the framework Claire and others had built proved strong enough to handle them. New children grew up knowing both cultures, speaking both languages and seeing cooperation as normal rather than strange. The Galactic Council pointed to New Arizona Territory as a model for resolving colonial disputes. Other communities facing similar conflicts sent delegations to study how Apache and humans had learned to share the land. Claire found herself training others in mediation and cultural bridge building. On the 10th anniversary of the Commission's ruling, both communities organized a joint celebration. Apache and human families gathered in the canyon, where Claire's original settlement had stood. A memorial had been built there, honoring all who had died in the conflict, both Apache and human. Peter's name was carved there, along with Kuruk's wife and hundreds of others. Nakano spoke to the gathered crowd, his voice carrying across the canyon. He said 10 years ago they had been at war, locked in a conflict that seemed to have no end. Today they stood together as proof that peace was possible when people chose honor over hatred, when they chose cooperation over conquest. He called Claire forward and she stood beside him, feeling the weight of the past decade. Nakano said that 10 years ago he had made a trade, giving up his grandfather's warhorse for a human widow. Many had questioned that choice, but that widow had proven worth more than any horse, more than any weapon. She had given them something more valuable than victory. She had given them peace. The crowd erupted in applause. Claire felt tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. She looked out at the sea of faces, both Apache and human, young and old, and saw hope. Nakano placed his hand on her shoulder and said quietly, just for her to hear, that he was proud of what they had built together. Claire replied that she was just glad she could help, that Peter's sacrifice had not been in vain. That evening, as the celebrations continued with music and shared food, Claire walked alone to the memorial wall inside the Apache stronghold. She ran her fingers over the carved names, remembering each story Grandmother Rain had told her over the years. These were the cost of the war, the price paid before peace became possible. She thought about honor and what it truly meant. It was not about being stronger or smarter or more righteous than others. It was about making hard choices, about seeking justice even when revenge would be easier, about building bridges even when walls would be safer. An Apache chief had traded his warhorse for a servant widow, seeking value beyond the immediate and obvious. A widow had chosen to help her captors rather than hate them, seeking peace beyond her personal loss. Together they had learned that honor had many faces, and the highest honor came from protecting life rather than taking it. As Claire left the memorial chamber and returned to the celebrations,